Taehyung tried to leave the hospital following an explosive fight with Jungkook, and the moment already felt historic before anyone outside even knew the details. The corridor was lit by harsh clinical LEDs, buzzing faintly overhead like a wire straining under pressure. Taehyung's hospital gown hung uneven on his frame, loose at the shoulders, open at the back, exposing the tape along his ribs and the edges of fresh bandages. A dark bruise stretched across his jawline, a cut sat near his lower lip, and exhaustion clung to his posture like gravity pulling harder than usual. Pain was present, but fury was louder. Security stepped into his path before he reached the exit. Two guards, positioned like immovable punctuation marks in the hallway, synchronized and alert. "Mr. Kim, you are not cleared to leave," one said, tone calm, firm, procedural. Taehyung's head snapped up, eyes sharp, restless, burning. "Don't stand in my way, I'm leaving." The second guard shifted just enough to close the gap. "Sir, this is for your safety." Taehyung laughed once, low, dry, humorless. "Safety? No one here even knows what happened." A nurse trailing behind him stopped mid-step, clipboard clutched too tightly. His breathing echoed faint but noticeable now, uneven not from fear but from holding back words that had been clawing at his throat since the night before. "Where is Jungkook?" Taehyung demanded, voice rough but commanding. The guards hesitated. "Contact is restricted under internal advisory protocols." "Protocols," Taehyung repeated slowly, stepping back toward the wall, using it for balance. "You mean control?" "HYBE wants control. They always do." But this time, control had already slipped. Hours earlier, the fight had erupted not in a rehearsal room, not backstage, not under scripted pressure, but in a private moment that had never been meant for an audience. Their raised voices had collided like mismatched harmonies. Jungkook had looked at him with a glare Taehyung had never seen in a decade of shared stages. "You don't even hear me anymore." Taehyung had fired back, "You think I asked to carry the spotlight alone?" Silence followed, thick, sharp, nuclear. Then came the swing. Not staged. Not accidental. Human, messy, and unforgivable in its honesty. The guards didn't see the beginning. They only caught the aftermath. The public would later see a leak, but Taehyung had lived every second of the unfiltered truth. He wasn't running from consequences. He was suffocating in them. Taehyung pushed forward again, trying to sidestep the guards. Pain knifed through his ribs like a flare detonating internally. They caught him before he hit the floor. His breath broke into a sound half cry, half choke, nothing like the voice that filled stadiums weeks ago. The nurses reacted instantly. "Wheelchair now, a doctor is coming." Taehyung didn't resist this time. His face had drained, pale, breath shallow, sweat forming at his hairline, not from weakness, from overload. Namjoon appeared at the doorway, silhouette tall, composed only by long practice at crisis management. He tried to walk out, the nurse said quickly. "His body isn't ready. His mind isn't ready." Namjoon exhaled, looking at Taehyung like he was staring at a brother and a breaking point simultaneously. "ARMY is already outside. Live streams are rolling. The internet smells blood even when it doesn't know the wound." Taehyung blinked slowly, head leaning back against the seat. "Let them smell it. Maybe they should finally know we bleed too." Namjoon didn't argue. He knew Taehyung meant every word. Security rolled Taehyung back toward recovery. Before the door closed, Taehyung whispered, "Not for management, not for the nurses, not for the world, but for the one person missing from the room. The one who had hit him. The one he still protected instinctively, even in rage. The one who had shattered 10 years of silent loyalty with one swing. I never wanted to lose you, Jungkook." Taehyung woke again to the violent honesty of silence. Not the quiet that heals, but the kind that interrogates. The heart monitor beside him kept a restless rhythm, steady enough to keep doctors from panicking, but jagged enough to expose what Taehyung refused to speak. His ribs still burned, his throat felt sand-scoured, and the spot where the IV had been earlier was taped over like a censored confession. He sat halfway up in the bed, before his body reminded him that he had limits, even if his pride did not. A chair scraped against tile. Taehyung turned his head slowly, expecting sterile instructions or another human wall in uniform. Instead, he met Seokjin's eyes. The eldest looked tired in a way fans rarely imagine possible, shirt wrinkled, hair unstyled, expression softened by something heavier than sleep deprivation. "You look like hell," Seokjin said quietly. Taehyung smirked, but the gesture cracked at the edges. "You should see the other guy." Seokjin didn't smile back. "I have." Jungkook looks like someone punched his soul, not just his face. Taehyung's breath caught for a moment, but he disguised it quickly with a slow exhale. Well, maybe he needed that too. Seokjin shook his head slightly. "No. You both needed someone to stop the train before it hit the station. Instead, you waited until it derailed." The hospital room suddenly felt smaller, the air heavier. Nurses moved outside like blurred background characters, uncertain whether this was a medical crisis or a public relations one. Taehyung swallowed. "Don't give me the wise monk routine, Jin. You weren't there." Seokjin leaned back in the chair. "No, I was. And that's exactly why you spiraled without an anchor. HYBE can block hallways. They can't block truth forever." Taehyung scoffed again, but weaker now, like thunder rolling farther away. "HYBE is trying to block everything. That's the point. They think silence is safer than honesty. They think a controlled lie protects better than an uncontrolled truth." Seokjin crossed his arms loosely, not defensively, thoughtfully. "The world is already writing its own version of last night. They don't care about your intentions. They care about impact, motion, emotion. And right now, you two are a tragedy they refuse to look away from." Taehyung rubbed his temple, eyes closing briefly. "Tragedy sells," he murmured. Seokjin nodded, painfully well. Then came the second voice. Yoongi stepped inside, hoodie pulled low, mask off his face, carrying the posture of a man who had made peace with storms but still hated getting wet. He looked at Taehyung for a long moment before speaking. "You screamed Jungkook's name down the hall earlier, not because you wanted a fistfight sequel, because you wanted closure you don't know how to ask for politely." Taehyung's eyes snapped open. "I didn't scream for closure. I screamed because he broke a decade of trust." Yoongi stepped closer to the bed, leaning against the wall instead of sitting. "Trust and dependence are siblings. You don't get one without the other. The betrayal hurt because the bond mattered." Taehyung didn't answer. Yoongi didn't need him to. Outside, the chaos had already grown teeth. Live streams from fans camped at the hospital gates kept freezing and reconnecting under overloaded networks. Pink and purple banners waved in the cold, unofficial press reporting running faster than official channels ever could. The internet wasn't asking if a fight happened anymore. It was asking who deserved forgiveness, who deserved blame, who deserved exile. The division was louder than the original swing. Namjoon returned to the doorway again, expression sharper now, leadership reflex activated. "They're demanding statements again. They want us to prep tonight." Taehyung's voice came instantly. "No prepping. No scripts. No manufactured tears. If they want statements, they can read the bruises on my face." Seokjin stood slowly. "That's the first honest thing you've said since waking up." Taehyung let out a dry laugh again, this one ending in a wince as his ribs protested. "No, it's not. The first honest thing I said was last night, right before he hit me. I said we should stop pretending, and he said I was naive. Then he swung to prove it." The room went quiet again, but this time not unbearable, inevitable. Yoongi pushed himself off the wall. "So what now, poet? You going to storm another hallway?" Taehyung looked at him, eyes dark but clearer now, storm consolidating into intent. "No, I'm going to make him walk into the fire with me. Not to burn him, to finally stop burning alone." Seokjin exhaled through his nose slow. "Then be ready. Because Jungkook isn't the only one walking into that fire. We all are, whether HYBE likes it or not." Taehyung leaned back slightly, staring at the ceiling again, the emotional scale of the moment pressing gently now instead of suffocating. He wasn't collapsing into defeat. He was collapsing into clarity. And clarity had momentum. His voice dropped low again. Hoarse but sharpened by resolve. "If they filmed fists, fine. Let's film truth next. Let them see a brotherhood that survived derailment, not perfection." Yoongi glanced at Namjoon. Namjoon glanced at Seokjin. Seokjin glanced at Taehyung. The silent consensus was heavier than signatures on contracts. It carried history, risk, reputation, market value, emotional debt, brotherhood, blood, guilt, love, jealousy, dependency, anger, regret, fear, denial, grief, and the one currency idols were never trained to trade publicly. Truth. The fire was not metaphorical anymore. It was procedural, public, digital, emotional, and irreversible. And Taehyung would walk into it conscious this time. The hospital no longer felt like a place for recovery. It felt like a waiting room before a verdict. The kind where the air sits heavy, not because it's still, but because everyone knows movement is coming and none of it will be gentle. Taehyung had been rolled back into bed, alarms finally quiet, but his mind was louder than ever. The nurses had retreated again, leaving the room to the machines, to tension, to men who had been stitched together by fame and now risked being torn apart by it. Hosok stepped inside first, slower than the others, like someone trying not to startle a wounded animal. His face carried disbelief, softened only by concern. What were you thinking?" Taehyung didn't look at him immediately. He stared at the window where the sun had fully surrendered to evening. "I was thinking that a mask is only armor until it becomes a coffin." Hosok exhaled sharply. "That line is going to trend by itself, you realize that?" Taehyung shrugged a shoulder slightly, then winced when his ribs reminded him they were still healing. "Good. Maybe something should trend that isn't a lie." Then came Jungkook. Not storming in this time, not swinging, not shouting, but walking in with the exhausted gait of someone who had already fought every argument inside his skull before arriving. He looked different under honesty. Hair unstyled, eyes swollen, hands shoved in his jacket pockets, knuckles still taped under the fabric. His jaw held tension like a loaded trigger, but his voice, when it finally came, was low. "You could have ruined everything," Jungkook said quietly. The silence after the sentence was sharper than the words themselves. Taehyung finally turned his head, eyes locking onto his. "I didn't ruin everything, Kook. You did. And I still stayed quiet. For years. Last night was the first time silence stopped protecting us and started killing us." Jungkook flinched slightly. "Killing us. HYBE is already in crisis mode. Lawyers are outside, sponsors are calling, reporters are circling." Taehyung nodded once. "Yes, killing us. Not with fists. With the years we lost pretending we weren't drowning. The fists were just the symptom. The lie was the disease." Hosok stepped back toward the wall. Sensing this was no longer a conversation he could soften with optimism. Jungkook took a step closer to the bed. "You think I liked feeling small next to you. You think jealousy was a choice. I was scared. Every damn day. Scared that the world would forget me if I stopped trying to outshine the version of myself they invented." Taehyung's lips twitched into another humorless smirk. "Outshine yourself. You swung at me because you couldn't outshine your fear." Jungkook's voice cracked. "You don't get it." Taehyung shook his head slowly. "No, you don't get it. I understood you better than you ever realized. That's why it hurt so badly when you said you didn't trust me anymore. Not because you doubted me. Because you doubted the one person who was still holding you up silently when the rest of the world thought you were untouchable." Jungkook stared at him, throat tightening visibly. "I was angry, I didn't think. Thinking isn't the point," Taehyung replied. "Caring was. You stopped caring long enough to swing. That's the wound, Kook, not the punch. The moment you decided silence was safer than brotherhood." Namjoon reappeared in the doorway again, posture tall, voice weighted with leadership and warning. "This is your last chance to speak privately. After tonight, nothing is private anymore. The leaks already made sure of that." Jungkook looked at Namjoon, then back at Taehyung. "And you're okay with that?" Taehyung leaned back against the bed fully now, eyes steady, storm quieter but more consolidated into intent. "No, I'm not okay, I'm conscious. And for the first time that consciousness is mine, not HYBE, not the media's, not ARMY, mine. If truth buries us, it buries the lies first. We'll still be standing." Jungkook didn't move. He looked like a man torn between retreating into a brand and advancing into a breakdown. Taehyung saw it clearly. He always had. "Sit," Taehyung said, voice low, offering closure without kindness frosting it. Jungkook hesitated, then pulled a chair slowly beside the bed and sat. The scrape of the seat on tile sounded like the start of something neither of them could undo. "You still think I don't trust you?" Jungkook asked, barely audible. Taehyung blinked once. "No, I think you don't trust yourself. And last night you swung at me because it was easier than admitting that." Another beat, another silence. But this time it felt like a contract signed emotionally, not legally. One that didn't care about sponsors, market caps, quarterly revenue, or public perception. It cared about consequence. And consequence was already breathing down the hall. The air outside the hospital room felt colder than the sanitized atmosphere they had been trapped in earlier, but the chill carried clarity instead of confinement. Taehyung sat upright now, back against the raised bed, the sting in his ribs no longer dictating his voice, only punctuating it. His mind replayed everything like a documentary cut into memory instead of film. Jungkook's shout, the swing, the denial, the rupture. But for the first time since the altercation, the replay didn't blur into chaos. It zoomed into meaning. Hoseok lingered at the far side of the room, arms crossed, his usual radiance dimmed under concern. Yoongi leaned near the window, posture casual but eyes sharp, observing the storm like a man waiting for lightning to choose its target. Namjoon stood near the door, leadership instincts humming quietly, and Jungkook remained seated beside Taehyung, silent, tense, but present, which was a confession in itself. "You asked for the truth," Namjoon said quietly, "but truth isn't a grenade. You don't throw it. You hold it long enough for everyone to see the pin you pulled." Taehyung nodded slowly. "Maybe last night was me finally showing the pin." Jungkook exhaled, low, slow, conflicted. "So what? You want us to narrate every fracture we've ever had like a press season arc?" "No," Taehyung said, voice calm but edged. "I want us to stop breaking in rooms where the cameras pretend they aren't rolling. HYBE wants damage control. The world wants blood. I want ownership. If we don't take it, we're just characters in a scandal someone else edits." Yoongi chuckled once from the window, the sound a single ember of levity in a room full of smoke. "Ownership, huh? That's the first currency HYBE never minted." Taehyung glanced at him. "Exactly. They minted idols, not men. And men punch back when idols get exhausted." Jungkook's fists tightened subtly, unseen by casual eyes but loud to Taehyung, who had spent years reading every microshift in his posture. "You keep talking like I planned this," Jungkook said quietly. "I didn't plan anything. I panicked. I was tired. I lashed out. That doesn't make it strategy." "No," Taehyung said, leaning forward slightly despite the discomfort. "It makes it human. But what you did after the punch, that was strategy. The pretending, the smiling for staff, the letting PR draft lies before bruises healed. That's the part ARMY will never hear from surveillance leaks. The punch is dramatic. The cover-up is criminal in its cowardice." Jungkook stood abruptly, chair clattering behind him. "Criminal? HYBE is the one coordinating narratives, burying nuance, monetizing pain. Don't lecture me about optics when you've been their poster poet for perfection too." Taehyung didn't rise. He let the words hit the wall, not his pride. "Poster poet," he repeated quietly. "No, Jungkook, I was the poster because I believed in the frame, not the fraud." Hoseok uncrossed his arms. "This isn't a courtroom, guys. This is a recovery room. You're arguing like prosecutors with insomnia." Taehyung glanced at Hoseok, then back at Jungkook. "He's right. It's not a courtroom, yet, but if we keep talking like this, it will be. And none of us practiced lines for that stage." Namjoon stepped forward, placing a hand between them metaphorically, not physically. "The public narrative already escalated. The leaks are making this look like a civil war of soulmates turned enemies." Taehyung's eyes narrowed. "Civil war implies sides. Last night had no sides. It had truth delayed. The delay hurt more than the fist." Jungkook's voice softened but stayed sharp. You really think a press room will fix anything? Fix? Taehyung said, leaning back again. No, Kook. A press room doesn't fix. It exposes, it clarifies, it burns. But at least the fire will have our names on it, not some blurred headline intern's interpretation. Jungkook stared at him, breath sinking unintentionally like they always did when silence went long enough. And if HYBE makes good on the threat, if they bury careers, if sponsors withdraw, if fans split permanently, Taehyung finally met his eyes fully. Then we learn who was here for the music and who was here for the mythology. The room fell into another long quiet. But this time, it felt less like suffocation and more like inevitability stepping into frame. Yoongi pushed himself off the window. You two idiots realize you're trauma bonding louder than your choreography ever synced, right? Hoseok smirked faintly now. Trauma bonding sells too, unfortunately. Jungkook shot him a glare that dissolved halfway. Taehyung laughed softly, then paused. Not because he found the joke unfunny, but because the laughter sounded real again and reality was scarier than the punch. Then the nurse knocked again, soft this time. The kind of knock that carries boundaries instead of breaking them. We're moving him to a secured recovery wing. No cameras, no visitors for now. Taehyung nodded before Namjoon could reply. For now is enough. Tonight isn't far. Security stepped in the hallway again, but this time not as blockers, as escorts. The distinction mattered. Taehyung swung his legs off the bed again, slower now, not wobbling with panic, but steadying into intent. Jungkook watched him rise, not intervening this time, not mirroring guards, not loading fists, but reading the moment like a man who realized the spotlight was already stolen by truth. And truth doesn't ask for authorization. The secured recovery wing felt like a different universe compared to the public-facing floors below. No screaming fans, no cameras disguised as phones, no executives whispering like narrators in a documentary they wanted to direct. The hallways were padded with discretion instead of pressure. Even the footsteps sounded softer, swallowed by engineered silence. Taehyung had been moved not because his body demanded secrecy, but because the world outside demanded spectacle, and spectacle is the one thing a hospital cannot medically prescribe. Taehyung sat at the edge of his new bed again, the position now a symbol instead of a threat. The room was larger, dimmer, warmer, but heavier in implication. Jungkook stood by the doorway again, arms uncrossed this time, palms visible, posture uncertain but honest in its lack of choreography. Namjoon entered behind him, carrying 2 cups of coffee, the steam rising like a peace offering written in smoke instead of ink. He handed one to Jungkook first, then extended the other toward Taehyung. Taehyung stared at the cup for a moment. Coffee won't fix last night, he said quietly. Namjoon nodded. No, but it keeps us awake enough to fix tonight. Taehyung took it without gratitude theatrics. He didn't need to say thank you. The acceptance was the punctuation. Yoongi arrived next, dragging a chair again but sitting this time without commentary. Hoseok followed, leaning against the wall again, but this time like support instead of separation. Seokjin entered last, closing the door gently behind him, sealing the room not as confinement, but as the final perimeter before decisions leaked into action. Jungkook finally spoke first. You really meant what you said earlier, about walking into the fire together. Taehyung exhaled, looking toward the window again. I meant that you shouldn't let me burn alone if you're going to light matches. Matches. Jungkook repeated, eyebrows twitching. You talk like I wanted destruction. Taehyung shook his head slowly. No, I talk like you wanted impact without accountability. That's not destruction. That's adolescence wearing idle gloves. Hoseok chuckled faintly again, softer, embers of levity returning but not igniting into dismissal. Idle gloves, he murmured. I'm putting that on a hoodie. Yoongi glanced at him. Make sure the hoodie doesn't punch anyone. Namjoon leaned forward, elbows resting on knees. Sponsors are already writing contingency emails. Army divisions are escalating into sociology case studies. HYBE wants a statement drafted, vetted, sanitized, and optimized for damage containment. Taehyung raised a brow. Optimized for containment. That's the opposite of optimization. That's burial formatting. Jungkook rubbed the back of his neck, breathing uneven but real. So what's your plan, then? You want to walk into a press room unfiltered and hope honesty doesn't turn into public execution. Hope, Taehyung said quietly. No. I want us to walk in conscious that execution is possible but silence guarantees it. Seokjin set his cup down gently. You sound like someone who already wrote the headline but wants to rewrite the ending. Taehyung smirked slightly again, humor returning cautiously like muscle memory. Maybe I wrote the headline years ago. Last night was the footnote exploding into a chapter. Yoongi finally leaned back in the chair. So you're admitting the punch was a plot twist you delayed publishing? No, Taehyung replied. The punch was the plot twist he delayed acknowledging. Jungkook exhaled sharply, not defensive this time but wounded in recognition. You think I didn't acknowledge it? Taehyung shook his head. You acknowledged impact, not intention, not consequence. HYBE can monetize impact. Only you can confess intention. Jungkook stared at the floor for a long moment before meeting Taehyung's eyes again. Fine, he said quietly. Then here's my intention. I didn't swing because I stopped caring. I swung because I cared too much about not being seen as the weaker half of a bond the world romanticized. I hated feeling replaceable in a brotherhood I depended on. That hate hit you because fear needed a face, and yours was closest. The room went quiet again, but not sharp this time. Surgical, inevitable, transformative. Hosok's expression softened. That was the longest sentence you've ever said without punching a metaphor. Namjoon nodded approvingly. That's a statement HYBE can't script even if they tried. Sponsors might panic. Fans might split. But that sentence has humanity. And humanity trends longer than scandals. Taehyung leaned back again, ribs complaining quietly but voice steady. Fear needed a face, he repeated softly. You chose mine. That means you trusted me enough to hurt me. Jungkook blinked once, eyes glassing again but not collapsing. And you trusted me enough to survive it. Taehyung finally smiled faintly, not to comfort, but to acknowledge the math of emotional debt neither of them could deny anymore. Surviving isn't the achievement, Kook. Owning the reason we almost didn't is. Namjoon stood slowly. Then it's decided. No scripts. No interns ghostwriting emotions. Tonight we walk into the fire together, not because it guarantees salvation, but because it guarantees signature. Yoongi stood next. Hosok followed. Seokjin grabbed his jacket. Jungkook didn't move until Taehyung swung his legs fully to stand again, this time not escaping but advancing. Jungkook finally mirrored the motion. Not the guards, not HYBE, not the fans, but the brother he punched, and the bond he refused to let be buried in silence anymore. And as they stepped toward the hallway again, security waiting outside, not blocking this time but escorting, the moment carried a different kind of weight. Not the weight of collapse, not the weight of sponsorship loss, not the weight of division. The weight of authorship. And authorship always walks forward. Wraithen comedy. Namjoon pushed the door open. The room went instantly still. Reporters rose slightly from seats instinctively, sensing this was no longer containment theater. This was narrative rebellion without permits. Phones hovered. Microphones angled like interrogation devices. Sponsors were watching from corporate headquarters. Fans were watching from livestream grids. HYBE executives were watching from encrypted panic rooms. And BTS was watching each other, finally aware that their silence had turned into a storyline they didn't consent to anymore. Taehyung stepped forward first before Namjoon could motion. Reporters leaned closer, expecting tremors. Instead, they got resolve. Last night you filmed fists, Taehyung said calmly. Tonight you witness men. HYBE wants containment. Fans want blame. We want authorship. If you're here to document fracture, fine, but you will document repair too, not mythology. A reporter in the front asked quickly, voice sharp, "Are you confirming a physical altercation between you and Jungkook?" Taehyung nodded once. "Yes. And I'm confirming the decade before it too, the one no camera bothered to leak. The punch happened because silence failed first, not brotherhood." Another reporter interjected, "Do you regret what happened?" Taehyung exhaled, "I regret the years that made it possible." Jungkook stepped forward slightly now, chairless, scriptless, defensive walls lowered. "My intention wasn't destruction," he said quietly but clearly. "It was fear weaponized by exhaustion. I depended on a bond I was scared to be replaceable in." The punch hit him because fear needed a face. His was closest. The room collectively inhaled. HYBE interns stopped typing. Reporters stopped interrupting, because interruptions were no longer necessary. The story was spilling itself. Taehyung glanced at Jungkook briefly. "You chose my face," he said softly. "That means you trusted me enough to hurt me." Jungkook nodded once, "And you trusted me enough to survive it." Another quiet, another punctuation. But this time the silence was not interrogation, it was documentation. Namjoon finally spoke, voice even, leadership now a witness instead of a shield. "BTS will not issue sanitized scripts tonight. We will issue accountability instead. HYBE can control narratives. They can't copyright brotherhood. The mythology ends where honesty begins." A sponsor representative watching remotely might have fainted at that sentence. A PR intern might have drafted a resignation letter in her head. Fans might have split into academic theses about loyalty, identity, bond rupture, jealousy, dependency, masculinity under idol pressure, narrative control, and the sociology of fandom schisms. Reporters might have realized they were no longer writing a scandal. They were writing history in first person. And Taehyung looked into the sea of microphones, ribs aching but voice steady, realizing the fire had already begun. Not because he screamed, not because Jungkook swung, but because for the first time none of them asked permission to narrate themselves anymore. Truth walked in conscious, and consciousness trends longer than scandals ever could. The press room had not exploded, yet the shockwaves traveled farther than any physical blast could reach. Reporters were still there, microphones hovering like metallic birds waiting for the next sound to define their migration. HYBE executives watching remotely had stopped packing and started calculating. Sponsors were no longer drafting emails, they were drafting escape routes. Fans online were split into emotional territories no algorithm could reunite easily. But inside the room, something unfiltered had shifted. The confrontation was no longer between two members. It was between truth and legacy had finally stepped aside to let truth speak first. Taehyung's breathing was audible now, not panicked but present, rhythmic, real. The ache in his ribs underscored every inhale, but pain was no longer his weakness. It was his citation. Jungkook stood beside him again, eyes forward, posture steadying, fear no longer hidden behind fists but standing in front of consequence like a witness who finally agreed to testify. The rest of BTS formed a quiet perimeter behind them, not to guard, but to affirm that fracture was collective, and so was repair. A reporter in the second row spoke first, voice cautious now, tone softer but hungry in professionalism. "Fans are demanding a live broadcast statement from both of you, not HYBE. They want it directly. They want it raw. They want it emotional. They want it unscripted. Are you prepared for that?" Taehyung leaned slightly toward the microphone closest to him. "No idol is ever prepared for raw. We are trained for performance, perfection, polish. Last night was the moment we realized polish hides rust, but doesn't stop corrosion. Tonight is the moment we stop letting rust define us in leaked fragments." Another reporter chimed in. "So you're refusing HYBE's narrative oversight?" "Refusing," Taehyung repeated softly. "No, we're reclaiming. HYBE oversaw impact. We oversee intention. Intention never needed oversight until fear turned it into collateral damage. Jungkook finally spoke again, voice firmer now, not loud but undeniable. HYBE can manage markets. They can't manage men who finally stop trading their humanity for quarterly reassurance. If fans want raw, we give them raw. But we also give them context. The world got the punch. It deserves the reason, not excuses, reasons. Hoseok exhaled behind them, eyes closing briefly, absorbing the magnitude. Yoongi looked toward the floor again, not in guilt, but in recognition that honesty carries gravitational pull stronger than PR spin ever could counteract. Seokjin watched quietly, the eldest realizing that leadership is sometimes letting the youngest stumble into the light without rescue, only presence. Namjoon nodded subtly again, shoulders squaring slightly, not for defense, but for accountability distribution. Taehyung continued, eyes scanning the reporters not to identify enemies but witnesses. You want a live broadcast? Good, but let it be clear. We're not here to confirm a fight. We're here to confirm brotherhood surviving its worst moment publicly, not privately. Jungkook added quietly, if you think a punch breaks brotherhood, you underestimate men. If you think silence protects it, you underestimate truth. Another silence, but this time not tense, definitive. Then came the door knock again, louder than before. Not a nurse, not a guard, not a PR intern. A HYBE executive stepped in physically now, not remotely. Mr. Kang, senior leadership. He carried the face of a man who knew markets better than heartbeats, but tonight even markets deferred to pulse. This is out of protocol, he said quietly. Taehyung smirked faintly again. Protocol protects brand. Brotherhood protects us. Mr. Kang's eyes narrowed. And what protects your careers? Taehyung leaned forward again, voice calm, almost poetic but steel-lined. Careers are already injured. We're protecting the men who have to live after them. Mr. Kang exhaled slowly, realizing that no internal contract ever prepared a company for idols who finally speak like shareholders of themselves, not performers of mythologies. Fine, he said quietly, but no violence, no escalation, no shouting. Taehyung smiled faintly again, but this time with acknowledgement instead of rebellion. We're done escalating fists, sir. We're escalating truth now. That's quieter but more permanent. Mr. Kang stepped back slightly, realizing he was no longer entering a press room. He was entering a narrative transition ceremony that no PR intern could officiate. Taehyung turned toward BTS briefly, then toward the microphones again. Reporters leaned closer instinctively again. HYBA stepped back again. Sponsors held breath again. Fans held phones again. And BTS held authorship again, finally realizing that truth is not the threat to legacy. Delay is. And delay had already expired. Taehyung exhaled once more, ribs aching quietly, but voice steadying like a final take in a 1-hour broadcast no one could edit out of history. The mythology was not ending. It was finally being signed by the men who lived it.